How long am I gonna be here? I know, I believe it. A lot of people read a lot into it. Oh, no, they do though.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you all today. We will look to get started with the agenda for the Infrastructure and Corporate Services Committee meeting today. Please check the city's website for additional meeting details. The City of London is situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, and Ottawander people. We honor and respect the history, language, and culture of the diverse Indigenous peoples who call this territory home. The City of London is currently home to many First Nation, Métis, and Inuit today. As representatives of the City of London, we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and live in this territory. I'm joined here in chambers by members of the committee, Councillor Pribble, Councillor Hopkins, and Vice Chair Frank. Councillor Van Meerbergen is coming soon, I think, not online yet. We're also joined by visiting members of council, including Councillor Ferreira. So we have a number of items to address. I'll go first to disclosures of pecuniary interest. I will declare my own for item 2.6, and I will, at that point, turn the chair over to Vice Chair Frank. I will look to put on the, well, I'll look for someone to put on the floor. Items 2.1 through 2.5, 2.7, 2.8. I've had a request to pull 2.9, 2.10, and 2.11. Are there any others that people are looking to pull? Okay, so again, I'm looking for a mover to put those items on the floor so we can be in discussion. Councillor Frank and Councillor Pribble for those items. I know there are some questions as well. If you'd like, can we start questions maybe in sequential order with items 2.1 through 2.5 if there are any questions? Okay, so I'll go to Councillor Pribble first for questions. Do you have any questions for items 2.1 through 2.5 first?
Thank you, Chair. No, excuse me, not actually a question, but I just want to inform that I did have certain questions regarding the London Downtown BIA, and all my questions concerned were answered by Ms. Mali and Ms. Smith. So I know they're in the audience here tonight upstairs. Thank you very much, and I have no additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Frank. Questions for items 2.1 through 2.5.
Thank you. Yes, I did have one question for item 2.1 and 2.2 with Argyle and Hamilton Road. I'm just curious, given I noticed that some of the money that the city gave is being carried over to use for future years, and I do notice that security is one of those items. I'm wondering what the long-term strategy is with paying for private security, and as the police services increase their complement, if the desire is eventually to stop having to pay for private security. So I was hoping perhaps if somebody from the Argyle and Hamilton Road could explain a bit of their plans for private security in the coming years.
Thank you. So first I want to take a moment and recognize and thank members of our BIAs for being here today with us. Much appreciated. And as we have on our agenda the proposed budget's municipal special levy, there are some questions, and I know there are a number of BIA leaders in the gallery. I'm not sure who I should address that question to first, either to Beth or to Carolyn, but if you want to, okay, I see someone coming to the mic. So go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bethany Mejia, and I'm the Executive Director of the Argyle BIA. To answer your question, Councillor Frank, we have always previously paid for private security in the Argyle BIA. We typically allocated about $20,000 per year to this service. As a long-term strategy, we will continue using our levy to pay for these services. And in addition, we are working on a strategy right now called the Industrial Friends of Argyle program. You will see that as a revenue line in our budget. We're actually going to be seeing if there is businesses outside of our BIA who are interested in this kind of work, and we're going to see how we can leverage the security services that we have it as a revenue source using staff to kind of mitigate the issues outside the BIA and continue paying for those services in a private matter. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Mejia. And Carolyn, did you have anything you wanted to add as well? Ms. Lester?
Yes, thank you. My name is Carol. I'm from the Hamilton Road BIA. I am the executive director. And to answer your question, Councillor, we are looking at another year in 2025 to secure. So that split was between from 2023 and then 2024 to 2025. And in mid-year, we're going to reassess. We are going to be assessing in terms of moving forward what that looks like in terms of the 2026. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Frank. Go ahead.
Thank you, yes, and I appreciate those answers. I think, again, as we have seen with the increase in the cost of the police services, I'd be hopeful that it would decrease your cost on private security, so I'll keep an eye on that in the next couple of years.
Do you have any additional questions?
Yes, I do for Hyde Park BIA, though, so I'm not sure if anyone else has any for Argyle and Hamilton Road before we move on. No? Okay, wonderful. Then through the chair, I was hoping to get a bit of a understanding. The increase, it appears to be 17%, and that seems significant compared to the other BIA increases. So I was hoping for perhaps a bit of an explanation as to why such a significant increase at this time.
Thank you. And I will go to Donna, who's here from the Hyde Park BIA.
Good afternoon, and thank you. Thank you for your question. Yes, we are on paper looking higher than the other BIAs. Our 17% increase includes roughly $33,000 in a supplemental tax repayment, for which we got a bill last year of $155. We made the first payment last year from our surplus, and then moving forward at the next 4 years, we'll be making further payments of $33,000. So that's what that in part is due to. Our actual BIA operational increase is about $74,000, so $6,773 if you took that out, which puts us at about 12%. That also is higher. That covers some things such as a hotel study that our board has decided to conduct, which is about $15,000. An increase to our Hyde Park Dollar program, which is a very popular program that has had a lot of economic positive impact in the area. The big one is to our events of about $55,000. Between that $55,000 is an amount that you can see from our past budgets where we have raised roughly $70,000, $60,000 to $70,000 a year through events, sponsorships, and some of our programs where we invoice back. Our ability to continue fundraising to that extent, we feel is more sustainable by putting it right inside our levy budget. And while we do that, we would still be doing our fundraising activities in hopes of offsetting other things like levies or unexpected levy payments. But that is what the increases represent, is basically we're right-sizing so that we can sustainably continue to run our events in Hyde Park.
Go ahead, Councillor Frank.
Thank you. I appreciate that background. And just because I don't know the average levy amount for a business, what would that 17% increase on average kind of represent? Is it $10, $100, $1,000? I just don't have a frame of reference for that.
My rough math is about, we have 350 to 400 businesses in our BIA, 350 before the property owners, I believe is the number. So it's just over 200 a year, I believe is the number.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And just because again, to a smaller business, maybe it's a bit substantial, but to a larger, perhaps not. Has your membership kind of been notified of the increase and they're aware of it? It is a bit of a jump, in addition with the municipal property tax increase, I can imagine it might be a bit difficult with some of your members.
Yes, absolutely, they have been through correspondence, but also through our annual AGM, where our budget was sent out to all of our members, and we had a good crowd for our AGM. We had one member opposed. Of all others, they were in favor and understanding of where we're going.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I know Councillor Hopkins, you had some questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the BIAs for being here with us. We had to do a lot of reading here and always interested in knowing what's going on in the city. And also thank you for being available to answer some of the questions I've already had answers to. I do have a question through you, Madam Chair, regarding some of the financial statements that have been delayed. And I know it is problematic, and maybe through you to staff looking at changing our bylaw to sort of address the delays in the financial statements, but also a possibility of withholding those second installments if the financial statements are there. My question through you to staff is this going to be across the board for all BIAs if staff are going to be looking at doing that?
Thank you. I'll go to Ms. Bourbon.
Thank you, through the chair. So currently, there is no requirement that ties what the payments are to the provision of the financial statements, although there is a requirement to provide the financial statements. So one of the things that we have been looking at is other BIA legislation across the province and others that might have that. There is precedent against in the province where they do have their first time payments tied to the receipt of the audited financial statements. So certainly it is a practice that is employed throughout the province. So that's certainly something that Civic Admin is looking at right now, and it would require a bylaw change that we would need to bring forward into the future. So certainly we are waiting to see the results of the discussion today, and it's something that is on our radar and possibly, but that would be something that if we were to bring that forward, we would do consistently across the board. It would not be one BIA, it would be all of our agency boards and commissions that we'd be looking to do that where it's a requirement.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you for that information. I know we have some big BIAs and some small BIAs, and I know the challenges that can exist, especially with the smaller ones, but I would be very supportive of looking at that bylaw as well. I don't know if we need a motion to do that, but I'm really pleased that Civic Administration has brought that to our attention.
To Ms. Bourbon, do you need direction?
Thank you, the chair. Certainly, if council wishes to ensure that that happens, providing that direction to modify the BIAs and bring that forward to have the inclusion of the receipt of the financial statements before first payments are put forward. Certainly, if you want to ensure that that happens, direction would be great, and then we can take that forward.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins, I'll leave it to you for any follow-up comment if you're interested in moving anything forward, but it would likely be at a future meeting and not right now since we're on a consent item.
And would that be brought back at a future meeting? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so your opportunity, you could do that at council as well, if you're looking to do that.
So you're saying at a future committee meeting, I can provide direction, or at a council meeting?
Yeah, or so if you wanted to do it as a motion at council, coming out of the consent on this item, then you could do it at the next council meeting, or you could do it.
Thank you for that information.
And the clerk's happy to help you with that. Okay, looking for others on, we've got Councillor Pribble on items 2.1 through 2.5, and then we have the rest of the items that are on the consent agenda that we have not moved away from.
Thank you. Actually, I have a additional question through the chair to Ms. Pakowski of Hyde Park. And my question is, with the proposed potential enlarging the boundary of your BIA, will you be considering potentially decreasing the levy, or the additional amounts you are planning to do for additional initiatives. And I do understand you need this increase now because you have certain financial obligations, but I'm looking for the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go to the gallery. Ms. Bukowski, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Overall, the budget would increase to account for the expanded BIA. But overall, the costs would go down for all of our businesses because we wouldn't need to double up on resources. So we already have staffing in place, and there's certain programs we already have in place. So those costs would be realized through reduction in sharing resources throughout the expanded BIA for our businesses.
Thank you. No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions for the BIAs before we move on to items 2.7 and 2.11 questions? Councillor Ferreira, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just comments. Like I did here, we have big BIAs, we have small BIAs, and I see that every BIA has brought, a different proposed budget for the special levy for a case by case. So I just wanted to say, I think you guys are doing good work. I do see the different cases, they're specific to your areas. And I just want to say thank you for the work that I see. I'm obviously going to be saying thank you to the Downtown BIA. I really appreciate your dedication and hard work and your consistent communication with me and with council. I do want to say to council, we are going to be engaging council more. We want you to speak with the Downtown BIA more and you have your questions answered regularly moving through. But I just wanted to say good work that I see coming out from all the BIAs for the city. And I guess I'll just leave my comments there because I really just wanted to say I recognize the good work. I know council does too, and looking forward to what this next year brings.
Thank you. Okay. Any questions for items 2.7, 2.8, 2.10, or 2.11? Councillor Frank.
Thank you. I just want to say yay for money for 2.7.
Okay, other than an official yay. All right, well, with no further comments, we will look to open the vote on those items, everything except for 2.6 and 2.9.
Councillor Van Meerwegen. Closing the vote, motion carries 5-0.
Okay, thank you. And again, Councillor Ferreira said it quite nicely, but thank you to our BIAs for being here today. Thank you for the good work you continue to do. Much appreciated the engagement and wishing you all the best in 2025. Okay, with that, we have no scheduled items or items for direction, which takes us back to additional business before we move on to the deferred items list. With that, I will turn the chair over to Vice Chair Frank for item 2.6, of which I've declared a conflict of interest as Fanshawe College is my employer.
Thank you. Yes, and I have the chair. Any questions for item 2.6 for staff? Yes, Councillor Pribble.
So the providing officer to the staff, all these initiatives, I just want to clarify that all these initiatives are within the budget, and also the amounts from all the funding sources, the balances that are available are sufficient to feed our future projects. Thank you.
Thank you. And to staff?
Yes, Madam Presiding Officer. In fact, we are under the reset budget that was provided during the last multi-year budget, last full multi-year budget process, and we remain within our budgeted balances.
Thank you very much. No more questions.
Thank you. And I was reminded I should get a mover and a seconder to get this on the floor for further debate. So do I have a mover? Councillor Hopkins, and a seconder, Councillor Pribble. Wonderful. And Councillor Hopkins, I saw your hand.
Yeah, thank you. Presiding Chair. Quick question, really pleased that this is coming forward, that we're going to be doing some communication to those businesses and sending out notices. Wondering what are the expected timelines? Are there any?
Thank you. To staff?
Madam Chair, I'm going to ask Ms. Dan to answer that question.
Thank you, and through the chair, the project will start as soon as possible in the spring. So that was one of the reasons why we tendered early or in late years, so we can be awarding now, get everything ready to start as soon as we can. We've already had initial communications with walkabouts to all businesses on the property or along the stretch, and we're on track to keep everybody informed as it goes forward.
Thank you. Any further?
No, just good to know. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions or comments on this item? I see none. Okay, then I will call the vote. All in favor? Actually, there we go. Perfect. I forgot. I was going to do a hand vote, but we have e-scribe.
Closing the vote, motion carries 3-1. One recuse.
Thank you, and returning the chair.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 2.9, which is the assessment growth for 2025, changes in taxable phase-in values and shifts in taxation as a result of reassessments. I've had communication requesting a delegation from Mr. Butler. I'm looking for a member to move and a member to second the delegation request. Councillor Pribble and Councillor Hopkins. That will open for a vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 5-0.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, Mr. Butler. Please go ahead. You can come to the microphone, and you have 5 minutes for your delegation.
I'm glad I'm here on time. That really blew through the agenda, so thank you. Chair Rama and the city staff that answered the 2 prerequisite questions, I'm all good there. And thanks for the feedback. I didn't know that could be done. I'm here to ask for your help as the ICSC committee. I've been here for a couple of years looking at this particular, I guess it's a bylaw. And I took an opportunity about 2-3 years ago to look at what other well-run cities are doing with their asset growth management fund. And this is new. And I looked at, places like St. Thomas, Windsor, anything that wasn't by level governments, because that's a little hard to understand. Their budget's online. Everything's online. And what I found is we're quite unique in what we do here. And unique is where I need some help. I'd like help with this community, or with this committee, to take forward a recommendation to, I guess, the SPC in mid to late February to open this up. This bylaw looks like it's maybe 13, 15 years old. We've come a long way since then, and I think we need to review its relevance and its taxpayer fairness in comparison to other communities, other well-run cities, in terms of what we do with the funds and how we use those funds. So with that said, I'll talk about the top 5 first. All the other 5 cities that I looked at, and some of those, well, you could turn to our new city manager, Sandra, down below, and ask what the 3rd line of St. Thomas's budget is. His ops budget just goes, top line is this, there's another 2nd line, and then I think the 3rd line takes asset growth and rewards that back to taxpayers right away. That's consistent across all 5 cities I looked at. What do? Well, you know it well. We add that to the ops budget. That carries forward to the following year as a starting inventory for the ops budget. And from a taxpayer fairness point of view, that really adds up after a while. It's quite inflationary. The other cities have different ways of handling their different, I guess, business cases is to look at it because there's various pressures there. But all things that are considered there is the things that were consistent is they align with their budget process. The asset management gross piece is pulled into the budget process rather than be a consent report. So it's got far more visibility, far more opportunity for public engagement, far more opportunity for council to look at it from, I guess, a priority point of view with the other requests we have. The 3rd piece of the top 5 is it's very inflationary. When you look at what's changed in the last 12, 13, 14 years, We didn't have a 4-year budget. We didn't have a budget that showed up with, what's the budget folks call it? A baseline. I call it a baseline or a keep the lights on percentage. And our keep the lights on percentage this year, 225, is 4.6. That's already allocated in the baseline budget. So when you start building budget cases or business cases on top of that to do more, you look at it from a taxpayer fairness point of view with other communities and you say to yourself, that's quite inflationary. You got the 4.6 to start with, and then the trees group or some other group comes in and says they can't possibly do whatever they have to do without some sort of increase. And all of a sudden you get a 10% increase. It's very, very inflationary. The fourth part of this is, are we really putting it to the proper places? And I'll give you an example that just blew my mind in the current budget coming forward into this year. And that was, we added some very serious people that we needed in the planning department. I think it was 7 full-time equivalents. And that came as a budget request. And I looked at that and I said, this is exactly where the Ask Growth Fund should go. This is where we want our money to go, to new initiatives, to things that really make a difference in this city. And the fact that they're continuous checks all the boxes on this council's viewpoint. We're always looking for something. We don't want to take it from a reserve fund. We don't want it to be one time. Well, this fund is always someplace between 1.2% and 1.8%. It can't be.
You have about 10 seconds to wrap up.
Okay. So all I'm really asking for is your support to open this up, let staff have a look at it from a fairness point of view and an allocation point of view. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. This report that's in front of us today is here to receive for information. Are there any, I'm looking for a mover and seconder, and then any questions? Councillor Frank as mover. Councillor Purple for second, and then I'll open up for questions. Councillor Purple and Councillor Hopkins, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to our staff, if I can have some comments, and there was certainly mentioned municipalities, and I know our city manager is very familiar with it because she came from there. If there's any comments from either her or from our finance staff, thank you.
Thanks. I'll look to our finance staff. I know that Mr. Butler had a chance to reach out through me for questions, but is there any additional comments you'd like to make?
Thank you through the chair. The only thing I would suggest is that we know this policy is unique to the City of London. It is a policy that was put in place to ensure that growth pays for growth. So the assessment growth policy specifically speaks to funding the growth costs of the municipality. We've had numerous reports, and we're happy to bring additional information forward again in the future through the policy review, but certainly it ensures that the costs of a growing city are paid for with new revenues from the revenues of a growing city. So that was the intent of the policy. We're very, very pure in how we manage that policy in terms of growth specifically being allocated towards that based on how the policy is written. So it's been tweaked over the years to ensure that it's very, very pure and is based specifically. Once upon a time prior to the policy, a lot of the growth was being eroded through the budget process. So levels of service were not being maintained across the municipality because through the budget process, cuts were made and certainly had long-lasting impacts. So that was intended. So there's lots of work behind it, and really the intent is to ensure that growth does continue to pay for growth, and costs are not always equal in a given year. They tend to be very, very lumpy, and that's basically the intent behind the policy. So as you can see in today's report, growth is very inconsistent from year to year, and certainly what we are seeing this year, the percentage increase from assessment growth is considerably lower than what we have seen in the last number of years, and as a result, the revenue increase is quite significantly lower than what we've seen over the last couple of years.
Councillor Purple?
Thank you. And one follow-up question with the specific example with the additional hiring of our planning staff. The way the current policy is set up, would this potentially qualify as a growth base for growth? And if it would, are there any pluses, minuses if we were to go that route in this specific example, hiring additional planning staff? Thank you.
Mr. Murray?
Thank you, and through you. So, excuse me, the policy does not specifically speak to certain service areas being eligible or ineligible. It is very clear, however, on what the criteria are and what is or is not an eligible request. So the assessment growth funding bucket or pot of funding is available and open for all service areas across the corporation to submit their requests to access, as long as they can submit an appropriate business case that is backed by suitable metrics that demonstrate the linkage to growth. They can certainly put those business cases forward and request funding through the assessment growth process. Thank you.
Councillor Purple?
Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Hopkins and Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Butler, for being here. I think it's an important conversation, so thank you for starting the conversation. Really appreciate staff's comments, though, about the flexibility that our bylaw allows. And my first question was going to be around the weighted assessment growth and why it is lower. And I did hear more or less an answer to my question that it is going to be lower this year. So just confirming that and maybe a little bit more reasons why.
Mr. Murray?
Thank you, through the chair. So as noted in the report, and chart 1 in the report provides a nice 20-year history, actually, of what assessment growth has been through the years. For 2025, it's 1.2%. By comparison, the last couple of years have been 1.68, 1.82, 1.4. So it is slightly lower this year. I think we can attribute that to just generally economic conditions, and this is likely something that's attributable to the slowdown that has occurred in the economy as a result of interest rate increases a couple of years ago. Typically, we see a couple of year lag in assessment growth, so it takes a couple years for the impacts of any general economic trends to flow through to assessment growth. So I think that is reflected here in what we're seeing for 2025 in a slightly lower amount, attributable to those interest rate increases a couple years ago. Thank you.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, thank you for giving further clarification to what's going on in our city. I do appreciate it. My next question was relating to the change in property valuation from reassessments in 2016. And my question, I guess, is more, how does that relate to where are we? How much do we understand where we are when it comes to that reassessment in the base year of 2016? So I know representing the City of London at the AMO board, AMO has been doing a lot of advocating to get these reassessments through MPAC, and it's really, I think, wearing my municipal hat at AMO, important to know where we are as a city. So I just want to sort of understand a little bit more why that is important as we have this conversation here today.
To staff, go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, there's been a great amount of discussion as to, why it's important to keep the current value assessment up to date. As we see, it's called current value assessment, and it's now 9 years old. So it's no longer current. So, and through the COVID interruption and not resuming that assessment as scheduled, we're seeing many different economic conditions. So I guess if I'm understanding correctly your question, how is it going to impact us when they actually do reassess? And unfortunately, we don't have any data-driven response to that, other than whenever there's a reassessment, there's shifts between different classes, residential, commercial, industrial, et cetera. And that's where we use tax policy to adjust ratios as necessary to help mitigate the impact on taxpayers.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, really pleased to hear that we're doing everything possible to mitigate that for the taxpayer, and really appreciate the conversation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity as a visiting member to ask a couple of questions on this. I think, though, the very first thing I want to do is through you ask Ms. Barbone or Mr. Murray if my understanding is correct that the assessment growth that we receive comes on completion / occupancy of a property. It's not when the foundation is poured, it's not when a shovel goes in the ground, but it is in fact when the project is done and the property is then, whether it's commercial, industrial, residential, it's then being used for the purpose for which the planning application was approved.
Thank you. I'll go to Ms. Barbone.
Thank you. That is correct. It is at the completion of the project. MPAC completes the reassessment. They do their final reviews, and then through the assessment roll, we receive those supplementaries throughout the year, and then the assessment growth is completed the following year with the entire full tax roll for the levy, including those new properties that are on there. So that is not only just new properties that are being built, that would be additions and or other things that have triggered assessment increases. Notably, that also includes things that may also decrease the assessment, that may potentially change the valuation if there are fires, et cetera, that require the properties to be reassessed. So it's not always, it is a net number, the assessment growth number. There are other things that do come off it as well.
Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Yeah, I think that's really important to underscore, because I think when we look at this year's assessment growth being down a little bit compared to some recent historical numbers, it's also important for us to all reflect on the fact that in the last calendar year, as a council, we approved over 22,000 units of residential housing development. Those aren't built yet. And it takes longer when we are doing high-density residential to complete a project than it does for a single-family home. I see Mr. Wallace is in the gallery, and I'm sure he would nod in agreement that a 35-story apartment building is a little bit longer time frame than a single-family home or a wood-frame townhome. So I'm confident that in the future, as some of these projects are developed out and are completed and become occupied, we will see this number bump back up a bit, because we know we're seeing some significant growth pressures in the city. And of course, with those residents comes the new taxation that supports the services that they need. And I think it's really important that we continue to keep part of the policy. I know we're just receiving the numbers today, but a part of the policy that's really focused on sort of the automatics for growth. You know, when a new subdivision is built out, Mr. Stanford needs to be able to provide garbage collection and green bin collection to those residences. And Mr. McRae and Mr. Gillard need to be able to provide snow plowing of those streets. So having that money come right out of the assessment growth makes a lot of sense. I do want to ask, though, with respect to, and I appreciate the comments about flexibility, but I reflect back on the multi-year budget process as well, and the frustration that some of us, myself included, expressed about London Transit ask and it not being partially funded through assessment growth. And in part because growth is not all about new development. We are seeing an emphasis on infill, and that creates impacts on you know, our local parks or our transit routes when we've gone from single-family homes. I'm just going to pick Oxford Street, for example, but we see planning applications right now coming in for high-rise buildings. Replacing those single-family homes means more transit users there, more park users there, more users of other city services in the area, and yet historically we have not been recognizing that as a growth-associated cost. I know we had some significant debate during the multi-year budget, and I know staff was working specifically with the London Transit Commission on how some of their growth needs could be met through assessment growth. But I'm just wondering, I'm not looking to make any direction or policy changes right now. Like I said, we're just receiving the number. But if staff can provide maybe some comment or any sort of update they might have on how we are progressing with reviewing the application of assessment growth, not just for greenfield development and providing services to new areas, but how we are looking at it in terms of increasing services in existing areas due to infill.
Thank you. I will go to Mr. Murray.
Thank you, and through the chair. So what I will say is that the current policy, as it is currently written, is not so prescriptive as to only limit the potential for assessment growth and accessing assessment growth strictly to greenfield areas and to new development. The policy does provide the flexibility or the ability to recognize that growth can also manifest itself through increased demand for services, and it may not be as linear as saying, this new development or subdivision is specifically driving growth. It may be more indirect in the form of growing demand for particular services. So the assessment growth policy certainly does recognize and allow for that. Every year, we typically do see cases that are more of that nature and perhaps less direct than others are. That is certainly allowed still through the policy. Now, having said that, the challenge, of course, with those is being able to support those requests with, in some cases, suitable metrics that can clearly draw that linkage or tie that linkage to growth, because there still needs to be at least some direct or indirect linkage to growth. So that is sometimes the challenge we see with some services, is making that linkage or that case. However, where that case can be made, the policy certainly does allow for an allocation of assessment growth for that purpose.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Yes, and I think that was at the heart of my question is how are we progressing with particularly with our boards, agencies, and commissions? Because I think our internal divisions do an excellent job, and perhaps part of that is maybe having some easier access to data, but with our boards and commissions in terms of communicating where the infill is happening. And perhaps this is more of a question actually for Mr. Mathers and Ms. McNeely in the long run through the planning department, but how we're communicating with our boards and commissions where the intensification targets are being met or are at least progressing towards being met, so that when they're considering their business cases, whether for the budget or for assessment growth, that they have the ability to access those metrics somewhat more easily. I do look at the planning division as one where it's very easy to say, here's where we've approved units. But do those unit metrics tie directly into, for example, parks usage in Mr. Yeoman's division, and how
you have 10 seconds.
How we can do a better job or work with our boards and commissions on those metrics?
Okay, that was quite a global question, so I'm not sure, but I think I'll go to Ms. Barbone.
If I can perhaps provide maybe one last thought, like, is that part of staff do our internal service reviews annually, and I know there was some training for boards and commissions recently. Is that part of the service review in terms of accessing the metrics? Perhaps if that narrows the question to a little bit more tightly.
Thank you.
focused.
I think that does help. So, Ms. Barbone, if you want to address that, thank you.
Thank you through the chair. So certainly when we issue our budget guidelines, there's much data that we provide that's more of the global type metrics in terms of growth, population increases, et cetera. So there's a level of information there. I think launching off of Mr. Murray's, it also depends on how those metrics that we have then link with the metrics and the linkage to the demand, which is typically not the data that the civic administration would normally have. It's typically, there's a how you connect the data that is corporately available with what the data is that is driving the decisions and the service delivery. So certainly using transit as an example, we've met with Ms. Plechny, we've gone through some different scenarios and how we might consider doing some of those things in the future so that they might be able to look at how they're collecting their data in a way to be able to support a future business case. So that is something we will continue to refine. Everyone is a little bit different just based on the nature of the service and what the metrics are that the board agency or commission may also have to support the increase in demand as a result of growth. So I think that gets to what it is you're looking for. It's a bit of a combination, but that's where we've been trying to meet more regularly with the areas to try to look at how we can support them in being able to make those cases. Sometimes it's very intuitive to be able to say, we have greater population, therefore it's greater demand, but it's trying to get what are the actual metrics that prove that on paper to be able to put it into a business case that would actually be put in front of the council.
Okay, thank you. I do not see any other requests for questions for 2.9. With that, I'll look to open the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 5.1, which is the Infrastructure and Corporate Services Committee Deferred Matters List. This is the item where we have it in front of us to receive, and I'm looking for a mover and a seconder. Councillor Frank, Councillor Hopkins, any discussion? With that, I'll open the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 5-0.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have confidential matters, items 6.1, 6.2, and 6.3, of which those items are outlined in the agenda for the reasons by which we're going in camera. Looking for a motion to go in camera. Councillor Hopkins and Councillor Frank. I'll look to open the vote on that.
Closing the vote, motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. And
Recording stopped.
Thank you. We are back from in camera. I'll go to Councillor Frank to report out.
Thank you. I'd like to report that progress has been made for all the items that we went in camera for.
Thank you. And with that, I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Hopkins, Councillor Frank, and by hand. All in favor? Thank you.
Motion carries.
Thank you. We are adjourned.